The idea of a Saudi-Turkey-Iran alliance has been a recurring theme in discussions about the future of the Middle East. Yet it is also one of the most complicated and contested possibilities in modern geopolitics. At first glance, the concept of these three regional heavyweights setting aside their differences to work together may seem both compelling and improbable. They are three of the most influential Muslim-majority states, each carrying immense political, military, economic, and cultural weight. If they ever truly joined forces, the geopolitical balance of power in the Middle East and beyond would shift significantly. But when we peel back the layers, the story becomes far more nuanced, shaped by decades of rivalry, differing ambitions, ideological divides, and global interference. To understand the dynamics, let's start by looking at what makes each of these countries unique. Saudi Arabia is the world's largest oil exporter, home to Islam's holiest sites, and a central player in global energy markets. Its wealth, drawn from decades of oil production, gives it enormous economic leverage, while its religious status allows it to exert soft power across the Muslim world. Turkey, straddling Europe and Asia, carries the legacy of the Ottoman Empire, and under President Erdogan has tried to reassert itself as a leader in the Muslim world. Its geographic position makes it strategically vital for both NATO and regional security, while its military is among the strongest in the region. Iran, on the other hand, has a different kind of power base, relying heavily on ideology, revolutionary identity, and regional influence through proxy groups and alliances. Despite decades of sanctions, it has managed to build a formidable military and political network stretching from Lebanon to Iraq to Yemen. On paper, an alliance combining these three powers would be nothing short of transformative. Saudi Arabia would provide financial might and control over energy markets. Turkey would contribute military power, a strong industrial base, and geographic access to Europe and Central Asia. Iran would add ideological influence and deep-rooted connections across the region's Shia populations. Together, they could form a bloc capable of challenging Western dominance, countering Israeli power, and reshaping the political landscape of the Middle East. However, the reality is far more complicated. At the heart of the issue lies ideology. Saudi Arabia has historically represented a Sunni monarchy rooted in conservative Wahhabi traditions. Iran stands as the heart of Shia Islam, positioning itself as the leader of anti-Western resistance. Turkey under Erdogan has leaned toward Sunni populism and at times flirted with neo-Ottoman aspirations, trying to project influence across the former Ottoman territories. These ideological divides are not small details, but rather fundamental rifts that have fueled conflicts for decades. In Syria, for instance, Turkey and Saudi Arabia initially supported opposition groups, while Iran backed the Assad regime. In Yemen, Saudi Arabia has led a coalition against the Iran-supported Houthis. These battlegrounds illustrate how their interests have often collided rather than aligned. Performance in regional diplomacy is another important factor to consider. Saudi Arabia has been recalibrating its foreign policy, recently pursuing rapprochement with Iran through Chinese mediation, a move that shocked many observers. This suggests Riyadh is willing to adopt pragmatic approaches when it serves its long-term stability and economic diversification goals under Vision 2030. Turkey has similarly shifted its diplomatic posture, reconciling with Gulf states after years of tension and trying to mend ties with Egypt and even Israel. Iran, meanwhile, has pursued a strategy of endurance, surviving decades of sanctions and isolation by building strong networks with non-state actors and leveraging its position in Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. From a performance perspective, all three states have demonstrated adaptability, but the question is whether this adaptability extends far enough to overcome their deep-rooted rivalries. When we analyze design elements of such an alliance, we need to imagine what form it could realistically take. Would it be a formal bloc like NATO or the European Union, or would it be more of an informal coordination mechanism, focused on shared interests rather than binding commitments? A formal security pact seems highly unlikely, given their histories of mistrust. An economic cooperation framework might be more feasible, particularly as Saudi Arabia and Turkey seek to diversify their economies and Iran looks for ways to bypass sanctions. Trade, energy collaboration, and infrastructure projects could serve as low-risk entry points for cooperation. For instance, linking Turkey's industrial capacity with Saudi capital and Iran's vast resources could create economic synergies. Energy pipelines, transport corridors, and shared technology initiatives could all become the practical design elements of a limited alliance. One of the unique selling points of a Saudi-Turkey alignment would be the ability to present a united front against external pressures. For decades, the Middle East has been shaped by the involvement of external powers. Whether it was Britain and France in the colonial era, the United States and the Soviet Union during the Cold War, or the US, Russia, and China in the modern era. A regional alliance among these three powers would mark a dramatic departure from the pattern of external dominance, signaling that the region's future would be determined from within rather than dictated from outside. This could resonate strongly with populations across the Muslim world, many of whom are weary of foreign intervention. Still, it is important to recognize that such an alliance would face significant obstacles. Trust is perhaps the biggest. For decades, Saudi Arabia and Iran have viewed each other as existential rivals. Their competition has fueled proxy wars, sectarian divisions, and geopolitical polarization across the region. Turkey has oscillated between aligning with one side or the other, depending on circumstances, but has rarely acted as a consistent bridge. Even when opportunities for cooperation arise, underlying suspicion often undermines long-term collaboration. For example, the recent Saudi-Iran rapprochement may ease tensions, but it does not erase years of hostility or the structural competition over influence in Iraq, Syria, and the Gulf. Another barrier lies in their relationships with global powers. Saudi Arabia maintains strong ties with the United States, even if strained at times, and relies on American security guarantees. Turkey, as a NATO member, has obligations that complicate its freedom of maneuver, though it has increasingly tested the boundaries of its Western alliances. Iran, by contrast, is heavily aligned with Russia and China, especially in the context of sanctions. These divergent external relationships make it difficult to envision a coherent trilateral alliance without clashing with one or more global powers. An alliance would almost certainly trigger pushback from Washington, Tel Aviv, and even parts of Europe. The domestic politics of each country also play a role in shaping the feasibility of such cooperation. In Saudi Arabia, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman is driving a modernization agenda focused on economic diversification and global integration, which means stability and reduced conflict are key priorities. In Turkey, Erdogan faces ongoing economic challenges and political pressures, and often uses foreign policy maneuvers to consolidate his domestic base. In Iran, the leadership remains committed to preserving the revolutionary system and resisting Western pressure. But internal discontent and economic hardship are significant constraints. Aligning these differing domestic priorities into a shared vision is no easy task. From a technical standpoint, the alliance could theoretically create a formidable geopolitical structure. The combined population of the three countries would exceed 250 million, creating a vast market and labor pool. Their combined military forces would rank among the strongest in the world, with Turkey's NATO standard military, Saudi Arabia's advanced weaponry, and Iran's asymmetric warfare capabilities. In energy, they would form an almost unbeatable triad: Saudi Arabia's oil, Iran's gas, and Turkey's role as a transit hub connecting producers with European consumers. This would give them immense leverage over global energy markets, potentially rivaling or even surpassing OPEC's current influence. For the average observer, the question then becomes, if the advantages are so clear, why hasn't it happened already? The answer lies in the complexities of history, ideology, and geopolitics. Cooperation sounds appealing in theory, but in practice, the zero-sum nature of regional politics makes it hard to sustain. Each of these states wants to be the leader, not the follower, and that creates friction. Saudi Arabia sees itself as the guardian of Islam and the Arab world. Turkey envisions itself as the modern heir of Ottoman influence. Iran views itself as the vanguard of Islamic resistance against the West. Reconciling these competing visions into a single alliance requires more than pragmatism. It requires a shared strategic identity, which at present simply does not exist. Yet, despite these obstacles, the idea continues to resurface, which suggests that it reflects a deeper yearning for regional independence and unity. With the rise of China as a mediator in the region, and with the United States appearing less willing to be the sole guarantor of Middle Eastern stability, the ground is shifting. We are seeing more regional powers experiment with cooperation, even if only in limited ways. The Saudi-Iran rapprochement is one example, Turkey's reset with Gulf states is another, and all three share an interest in reducing the volatility that has plagued the region for decades. It may be more realistic to think of the Saudi-Turkey-Iran dynamic not as an alliance in the NATO sense, but as a fluctuating alignment, where cooperation occurs in specific areas while rivalry continues in others. They may align on issues like reducing external interference, stabilizing energy markets, or developing trade corridors, while continuing to compete in arenas like Syria, Iraq, or the Gulf. This flexible, issue-based cooperation may lack the grandeur of a formal alliance, but it is far more realistic given the political realities. At its core, the dream of a Saudi-Turkey-Iran alliance symbolizes the desire for a Middle East that is no longer shaped by outsiders but by its own regional powers. It represents the hope that old rivalries can be overcome for the sake of collective strength and independence. But whether this dream can ever solidify into reality depends not only on the leaders in Riyadh, Ankara, and Tehran, but also on the shifting global order, the persistence of sectarian divides, and the willingness of these powers to compromise on their ambitions in favor of a greater collective good.